Millionaire Autistic daughter sat alone at the mall, until a black woman asked, "Why are you here alone?" She sat perfectly still among the chaos of Saturday shoppers, her hands pressed against her ears as tears streamed down her face, and everyone just walked by. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's continue. The fountain at the center of Westfield Garden State Plaza bubbled endlessly, its sound mixing with 1,000 other noises that crashed against Charlotte's consciousness like waves against rocks. She pressed her palms harder against her ears, but it did nothing to stop the assault. The teenager's coral pink sweater, cashmere, expensive, chosen by her father's assistant, felt like sandpaper against her skin. Her dark blonde hair fell in curtains around her face as she rocked slightly back and forth on the marble bench. Too loud. Everything is too loud. The food court's grease and sugar scents battled with perfume samples from Macy's, creating a nauseating cocktail that made her stomach churn. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their frequency just wrong enough to make her teeth ache. A group of teenagers laughed nearby, sharp, piercing sounds that felt like needles in her brain. Charlotte's blue eyes darted frantically from face to face as people streamed past. A mother dragging 2 screaming toddlers. Elderly couples walking slowly, their canes tapping rhythmic beats on the tile. Teenage girls in bright yellow crop tops shrieking about someone's Instagram post. Each person moved with purpose, belonging, direction. She had none of those things. Her iPhone buzzed against her thigh, the 17th call from her father's office in the past hour. She'd stopped answering after the 3rd one, when Harrison's impatient voice had snapped, "Charlotte, your father is in Singapore. You know the driver will pick you up at 4 sharp. Stop being difficult." "I'm not being difficult," she thought, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. "I just can't. I can't make it stop." The sensory overload had started the moment she'd entered Hot Topic 20 minutes ago. The music, the flashing lights, the crush of bodies, it had all become too much. She'd fled to this bench, hoping the open space would help, but the mall's Saturday afternoon chaos was relentless. A security guard glanced her way, his expression mildly concerned but not enough to approach. She looked fine on the outside, well-dressed, clean, clearly for money. Problems like hers were invisible, the kind that money was supposed to solve but never did. What would you think if someone asked why you're here alone? The thought struck her suddenly. Because she was alone. Had been alone for 3 years now, ever since. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the memory of screeching tires and broken glass. 2 miles away in Clifton, New Jersey, Patricia Johnson pulled into her apartment complex's parking lot, her 12-year-old Honda Civic coughing as she turned off the engine. The October air was crisp against her brown skin as she stepped out, still wearing her red Target polo shirt and black slacks. Her shift had run long, again. Saturday crowds meant extra hours, but also extra pay she desperately needed. At 42, Patricia carried herself with quiet dignity despite the exhaustion that seemed permanently etched into her features. Her natural hair was pulled back in a simple bun, small gold hoops catching the afternoon light. She was beautiful in an understated way, the kind of beauty that came from strength rather than artifice. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "Rent reminder came today. You good?" Patricia stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Always am." It was a lie, but a necessary one. She'd been 3 weeks behind since losing her previous job at the insurance company. The target position was temporary, part-time, barely enough to cover basics. But she'd managed before, and she'd manage again. She always did. As she climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment, Patricia's thoughts drifted to the envelope hidden in her bedroom drawer, the one she couldn't bring herself to open. 2 years and 4 months since the funeral, and she still couldn't read the sympathy cards people had sent. Especially the ones about Marcus. He would have loved this weather, she thought, pausing on the landing. October had been his favorite month. Crisp air, changing leaves, the promise of Halloween costumes he'd planned for months in advance. Her keys jingled as she unlocked the door to her small one-bedroom apartment. The silence hit her immediately, the kind of quiet that felt too heavy, too complete. She'd grown used to noise, to chatter, to the constant sound of someone who needed her. Patricia set her purse on the small dining table and noticed the bills stacked there, waiting. Electric, phone, car insurance. Each one a reminder that life continued forward whether she was ready or not. She should shower, make dinner, maybe call her sister back with a more honest conversation. Instead, she found herself reaching for her car keys again. Just drive, she told herself. Don't think, just drive. It was something she'd started doing in the months after Marcus died. Aimless drives that helped quiet the noise in her head. Sometimes she'd end up at his old school, or the park where they used to feed ducks. Today, for reasons she couldn't explain, she pointed the Honda toward Route 17 and the mall. She'd worked at that Target for 3 weeks now, but had never actually shopped there on a weekend. The idea of crowds and noise normally repelled her, but something pulled her forward. Maybe it was the need to be around people without having to engage, to feel the energy of families and friends while remaining safely anonymous. Patricia parked near the main entrance and sat for a moment, watching people stream in and out. Families with strollers. Teenagers in groups. Couples holding hands. Everyone seemed to belong somewhere, to someone. She was about to start the car and leave when something caught her eye through the glass doors. A flash of coral pink, perfectly still among the moving crowd. That's strange, she thought, stepping out of the car for a better look. Charlotte's breathing had become shallow, each inhale a struggle against the weight pressing on her chest. The noise hadn't lessened. If anything, it had grown worse as the afternoon crowd thickened. Her father would expect her home soon, would want a report on her outing with friends that had never actually happened. She'd lied about having plans, about meeting people from school. The truth was simpler and more complicated. She had no friends. The combination of her autism, her family's wealth, and her own social anxiety had created a perfect storm of isolation. I should call Harrison, she thought, staring at her phone. Tell him to send the driver early. But that would mean questions. Questions about why she was ready so soon, what had happened to her plans, why she looked upset. Her father paid Harrison well to manage the details of Charlotte's life, but understanding her wasn't part of his job description. A young couple walked by, the girl laughing at something on her boyfriend's phone. They looked so easy together, so natural. Charlotte watched them with a mixture of longing and bewilderment. How did people make it look so simple? The touching, the conversation, the way they seemed to anticipate each other's needs? She'd tried, especially in the first year after her mother's death. Tried to be normal, to make friends, to pretend the sounds and lights and social cues didn't overwhelm her completely. But every attempt had ended in humiliation. Meltdowns in public, misunderstood jokes, the gradual drift of classmates who found her weird. Her father had eventually stopped asking about friends, about social events, about anything that might require him to acknowledge that his daughter's brain worked differently than others. It was easier to provide money for activities she'd never attend and clothes for occasions that didn't exist. Charlotte pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself smaller. The gesture was automatic, a physical attempt to create boundaries in a world that felt boundaryless. Her expensive sneakers, white leather Balenciaga that cost more than most people made in a week, pressed against the marble bench. What's wrong with me? The question had become a constant refrain, playing on repeat in her mind. Her therapist, the fourth one her father had hired in 3 years, kept insisting nothing was wrong with her, that autism was just a different way of processing the world. But different felt wrong when different meant alone. A mall announcement crackled over the loudspeaker, something about store closures and weekend hours. The sound cut through her like glass, and she couldn't suppress the small whimper that escaped her lips. That's when she saw her. A black woman in a red shirt was walking slowly through the crowd, her dark eyes scanning faces with unusual attention. Most people rushed past without seeing, but this woman moved with purpose, as if she was looking for something, or someone. Their eyes met across the fountain, and Charlotte felt her breath catch. There was something in the stranger's expression she'd rarely seen directed at her. Genuine concern without judgment, recognition without pity. The woman changed direction, walking straight toward her. Charlotte's heart hammered against her ribs. Part of her wanted to run, to escape before another adult could tell her what she was doing wrong, how she should be behaving, why she wasn't handling things better. But her legs felt frozen, and something in the woman's face made her stay. She sees me, Charlotte realized with a mixture of terror and hope. She actually sees me. The woman stopped a few feet away, close enough to speak without shouting over the mall noise, far enough to avoid feeling invasive. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but clear, cutting through the chaos like a lifeline thrown into stormy water. "Hey, sweetheart," Patricia said, her maternal instincts overriding every practical reason to keep walking. "Are you okay? Why are you here alone?" Charlotte's entire body went rigid at the sound of Patricia's voice. The question hung in the air between them. Why are you here alone? And for a moment, the mall's chaos seemed to fade into background static. No one had asked her that before. Not her father, not Harrison, not any of the therapists who talked about her rather than to her. Charlotte's voice cracked, barely audible above the fountain's bubbling. She looked up at Patricia with wide blue eyes that held too much pain for someone so young. "I'm fine." Patricia had heard that particular brand of fine before. It was the same tone Marcus had used when kids at school called him names, when sensory overload made him shut down, when the world became too much for his beautiful, different mind to process. She took a small step closer, her movements slow and deliberate. "Mind if I sit? These old bones aren't what they used to be after a long shift." The lie came easily. Patricia was tired, but not frail. She'd learned that asking permission gave anxious people control, something this girl clearly needed. Charlotte nodded hesitantly, scooting slightly to make room on the marble bench. Patricia settled beside her, leaving careful space between them. She could see the girl's hands trembling where they gripped her knees. "My name's Patricia," she said softly. "And you don't have to tell me yours if you don't want to. But I've got 2 good ears and nowhere else to be right now." Something in Patricia's tone, warm without being pushy, patient without being condescending, made Charlotte's carefully constructed walls crack just slightly. "Charlotte," she whispered, then immediately looked stricken, as if giving her name was somehow dangerous. "That's a beautiful name," Patricia said, and meant it. Like the city in North Carolina, or like the spider in that children's book. The spider. Charlotte's response was automatic, surprised out of her. She was different too. But she was also kind. Patricia felt her heart squeeze. Different. The word carried such weight when spoken by someone who'd been made to feel like different was wrong. "Different can be beautiful," Patricia said quietly. "Different can be exactly what the world needs." Charlotte's head snapped up, studying Patricia's face for signs of the false cheerfulness adults usually employed. Instead, she found something raw and honest, a grief that somehow made the words more rather than less believable. "You don't know me," Charlotte said, but there was no hostility in it, just exhaustion. "You don't know how different." "Maybe not," Patricia agreed. "But I knew someone who was different. Someone who saw the world in ways that made it more beautiful, more interesting, more full of wonder than I ever could have imagined on my own." The past tense hung between them. Charlotte was perceptive enough to catch it, sensitive enough not to push. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the Saturday crowd flow around them. A group of middle schoolers ran past, their laughter sharp and bright. Charlotte flinched at the sound, her shoulders drawing up toward her ears. Patricia noticed immediately. Too loud. Charlotte nodded, tears threatening again. Everything's too loud. Too bright. Too much. And I can't make it stop, and my father's assistant keeps calling, and I was supposed to be having fun with friends, but I don't have any friends, and... The words tumbled out in a rush. 3 years of isolation and sensory overload compressed into one desperate confession. Charlotte clapped her hands over her mouth, horrified at her outburst. "Oh, sweetheart," Patricia said, her voice thick with understanding. "You're having a sensory overload, aren't you?" Charlotte's eyes widened. Adults didn't usually know that term, especially not adults who weren't her therapists or teachers required to understand her diagnosis. "How did you?" "My son," Patricia said simply. "He used to get overwhelmed just like this. The sounds, the lights, the way people moved too fast and talked too loud. His brain was just wired to notice everything more intensely than other people." Used to. Another past tense that carried the weight of loss. "What happened to him?" Charlotte asked, then immediately looked stricken. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "It's okay to ask," Patricia said, though her voice grew softer. "He died 2 years ago. Complications from a seizure. He was 23, and he was the most remarkable person I ever knew." Charlotte felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition of shared pain that transcended their obvious differences. This woman understood loss too, understood what it felt like when the world became too much. "I'm sorry," Charlotte whispered. "Thank you," Patricia said. "His name was Marcus. And he would have liked you, I think. You have that same way of seeing things, that same gentleness." They watched a family walk by, parents with 3 young children, everyone talking at once, moving in the chaotic harmony of people who belong together. Charlotte felt the familiar pang of longing. "Where are your parents, honey?" Patricia asked gently. "My mom died 3 years ago," Charlotte said, the words coming easier now. "Car accident. And my dad. He's in Singapore. On business. He's always on business." Patricia felt anger flare in her chest, not at the girl, but at a father who could leave his clearly struggling daughter alone in a mall while he conducted business halfway around the world. She kept her voice neutral. "That must be lonely." "It is." Charlotte's honesty surprised them both. "He tries, I think. But he doesn't know what to do with me. Especially after Mom died. She understood me. She knew how to make things quieter when they got too loud." "Tell me about her," Patricia said. Charlotte's face softened, the tension around her eyes easing for the first time since Patricia had approached. "She was an artist. A painter. She used to say that my brain was like having extra colors on the palette, that I could see things other people missed." Charlotte's voice grew wistful. "She never made me feel broken." "Because you're not broken," Patricia said firmly. "You're wired differently, that's all. And the world needs people who see things others miss." Charlotte studied Patricia's face again, searching for deception or pity. Instead, she found something she'd almost forgotten existed: acceptance without conditions, understanding without judgment. "Why are you being so nice to me?" Charlotte asked. "You don't even know me." Patricia was quiet for a long moment, watching the fountain's water catch the afternoon light. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "Because 2 years ago, I was sitting alone somewhere, drowning in grief, and a stranger asked me if I was okay. She didn't have to. She could have kept walking like everyone else. But she stopped, and she listened, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. Charlotte felt tears spill over again, but these were different. Not the tears of overwhelm and isolation, but of recognition and relief. I feel invisible all the time, she whispered. I know, baby, Patricia said, the endearment slipping out naturally. I know you do. Charlotte's breathing had begun to slow, the crushing weight on her chest easing slightly. The mall noise hadn't decreased, but somehow it felt more manageable with Patricia beside her. My therapist says I need to practice social interactions, Charlotte said, making air quotes around the clinical phrase. But I don't know how. Everyone my age moves so fast, talks so loud. They seem to know things I was never taught. What kind of things? How to know if someone's joking or being mean. How to know when to laugh, when to speak, when to stay quiet. How to make friends without seeming desperate or weird. Charlotte's voice grew smaller. How to exist in the world without feeling like I'm doing everything wrong. Patricia felt her heart break and mend simultaneously. This beautiful, intelligent girl had been made to feel defective by a world that couldn't appreciate her differences. Can I tell you something Marcus taught me? Patricia asked. Charlotte nodded. He said that the world isn't too loud or too bright or too much. It's just that some people like you and him, have more sensitive instruments. Like the difference between a regular radio and one that can pick up signals from space. You're not broken, you're just tuned to frequencies other people can't hear. Charlotte stared at Patricia with something approaching wonder. He really said that? Word for word. Usually right after he'd had a meltdown at the grocery store or when the school called to say he'd hidden in the bathroom because the fire drill was too loud. Patricia smiled, the expression tinged with bittersweet love. He was brilliant, that boy. Saw patterns in numbers that made his math teachers weep with joy. Could tell you the weather 3 days out by watching how birds flew. But ask him to make small talk at a party, and he'd rather hide under a table. What did you do? When he got overwhelmed. Same thing my mama did for me when the world got too heavy, Patricia said. I reminded him that he was loved exactly as he was. That his differences weren't flaws to fix, but gifts to celebrate. And when that wasn't enough, I helped him find quiet spaces until he was ready to try again. Charlotte felt something loosening in her chest, a knot she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was there. My dad wants me to be normal, she said quietly. He pays for therapies and social skills classes and special tutors. But what he really wants is for me to stop being me. That's his loss, Patricia said with quiet conviction. And his fear talking. Parents get scared when they don't know how to help their children. Sometimes that fear makes them try to fix things that aren't broken. Charlotte's phone buzzed again. Harrison, undoubtedly, wondering where she was. She glanced at it and made no move to answer. You know what Marcus used to do when people stared at him for stimmying or getting excited about his special interests? Patricia asked. What? He'd wave. Just a little wave, like he was greeting a friend. He said it reminded him that other people were just people too, trying to figure out their own lives. Most of the time, they'd wave back. Charlotte almost smiled at that. Really? Really? Turned potential judgment into human connection. That boy had wisdom I'm still learning from. They sat together as the afternoon light began to shift, casting longer shadows across the mall's atrium. Charlotte felt calmer than she had in months, maybe years. Here was an adult who didn't try to fix her or change her or make her smaller to fit into spaces that weren't designed for her. Patricia, Charlotte said softly. Yes, sweetheart. Thank you. For stopping. For asking. For. Charlotte struggled for words. For seeing me. Patricia felt tears prick her own eyes. Thank you for letting me sit with you. It's been a while since I've had someone to talk to who really listened." Charlotte looked at her with sudden understanding. "You're lonely too." It wasn't a question, and Patricia didn't treat it like one. "Yeah, baby. I am. Maybe." Charlotte hesitated, then pushed forward with a kind of courage that only comes from having nothing left to lose. "Maybe we could be lonely together sometimes? If you wanted." Patricia felt something shift inside her chest, a door opening that had been locked tight for 2 years. Here was this remarkable girl, offering friendship not out of pity but from genuine connection. "I would like that very much," Patricia said. Charlotte's first real smile in months spread across her face, transforming her entirely. For a moment, the overwhelming teenager disappeared, replaced by someone younger and lighter and full of possibility. That's when Harrison's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Charlotte Elizabeth, what on earth are you doing?" Both women turned to see a thin, impeccably dressed man in his 50s striding toward them, his expression thunderous. Charlotte's body went rigid again, all the peace Patricia had helped her find evaporating instantly. "Harrison," Charlotte whispered, her voice small and frightened. Patricia felt every protective instinct she possessed roar to life as she watched this stranger approach the girl who had just begun to bloom. Harrison Whitmore approached them with the calculated stride of a man accustomed to controlling situations through sheer force of disapproval. His charcoal gray Armani suit was immaculate despite the October humidity, his silver hair perfectly styled, his pale blue eyes sharp with barely contained irritation. At 54, he'd spent the last 8 years managing every detail of the Pemberton family's domestic affairs, and Charlotte's unexpected deviation from routine was precisely the kind of chaos he was paid handsomely to prevent. "Charlotte," he said again, his voice carrying the crisp authority of boarding school discipline, "your driver has been waiting for 23 minutes. Your father specifically instructed that you be home by 4:30 for your Mandarin tutor session." Charlotte shrank into herself, all the confidence Patricia had helped her find dissolving like sugar in rain. Her hands began their familiar trembling, and she pressed them against her thighs to hide it. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I lost track of time." Harrison's gaze flicked to Patricia with undisguised suspicion. He took in her Target uniform, her modest jewelry, the 12-year-old Honda keys visible in her hand, and his expression hardened into something coldly professional. "And you are?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew exactly what category Patricia belonged in and found it wanting. Patricia rose slowly from the bench, her movements deliberate and dignified. At 5'6", she was shorter than Harrison by several inches, but something in her bearing made her seem taller. Her dark eyes met his without flinching. "Patricia Johnson," she said evenly. "I was just talking with Charlotte. She seemed upset." "I see." Harrison's smile was thin and sharp as a blade. "How thoughtful of you to take such interest in a stranger's child. I'm sure you understand that Charlotte's father values her privacy and safety above all else." The implication hung in the air like smoke, that Patricia represented some kind of threat, that her concern was somehow suspicious or inappropriate. Charlotte felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger. "Harrison, she was helping me," Charlotte said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I was having a panic attack, and she—" "You were having an episode," Harrison corrected smoothly. "Which is precisely why you should have called me immediately instead of discussing personal family matters with strangers." The word strangers dripped with disdain, and Patricia felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd encountered this particular brand of classist dismissal before, the assumption that her concern must be somehow motivated by self-interest, that someone like her couldn't possibly offer genuine help to someone like Charlotte. "I should go," Patricia said quietly, not because she wanted to, but because she recognized the power dynamics at play. Harrison held all the cards here, and Charlotte would pay the price for any conflict Patricia might cause. No! Charlotte's voice cracked with desperation. Please don't. You don't understand, Harrison. She gets it. She understands about. About what, exactly? Harrison's eyebrows rose in perfectly orchestrated skepticism. What could this woman possibly understand about your situation, Charlotte? About your needs, your condition, your family's circumstances. Each word was precisely chosen to emphasize the gulf between Patricia's world and Charlotte's, to make their connection seem ridiculous and inappropriate. Patricia felt the familiar weight of being judged and found wanting, not for anything she'd done, but for who she was, where she came from, what she looked like. It was a feeling she'd carried since childhood, through job interviews where she was almost perfect for positions that somehow went to less qualified candidates, through interactions with Marcus's teachers who assumed she was neglectful rather than overwhelmed, through 1,000 small moments where her worth was questioned before she'd even spoken. But watching Charlotte's face crumple with shame and disappointment, Patricia found something she'd thought she'd lost: her voice. I understand what it feels like to be overwhelmed by the world, she said, her tone calm but unwavering. I understand what it means to love someone whose brain works differently than most people's. And I understand what it's like to sit alone in a crowd and feel invisible. Harrison's expression sharpened. I'm sure you have many opinions about child-rearing, Miss Johnson, Patricia repeated. And I'm not offering opinions. I'm offering friendship to a young woman who was in distress. Friendship. Harrison made the words sound slightly ridiculous. How generous of you. I'm curious. Did Charlotte mention that her father is Robert Pemberton? Of Pemberton Industries. The name drop was designed to intimidate, to remind Patricia of the vast wealth and power gap between her world and Charlotte's. Harrison watched her face carefully, looking for signs of recognition, calculation, or greed. Patricia's expression didn't change. She mentioned her father was traveling on business. That's all. I see. Harrison's tone suggested he didn't believe her. Well, Ms. Johnson, I'm sure you understand that Mr. Pemberton is very protective of his daughter's welfare, especially given her particular vulnerabilities. The way he said particular vulnerabilities made Charlotte want to disappear entirely. It was the same tone he used when explaining to housekeeping staff why certain textures needed to be avoided, why sudden loud noises were problematic, why Charlotte required special handling. She's not vulnerable, Patricia said quietly. She's sensitive. There's a difference. Something flickered in Harrison's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that this woman would dare to contradict his assessment. With all due respect, Ms. Johnson, you've known Charlotte for what, 15 minutes? 20. I've been caring for her welfare for 8 years. I think I'm better positioned to understand her needs. Caring for her schedule, maybe, Patricia replied. That's not the same thing. The words hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Charlotte looked between them with growing horror, watching the two adults who had shown her the most attention in months face off over her like she was a prize to be won rather than a person with her own agency. Harrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Charlotte, we need to leave. Now. But Charlotte began. Now, Charlotte. The authority in his voice was absolute, honed by years of managing a household where efficiency and order mattered more than comfort or preference. Charlotte had been trained since childhood to respond to that tone without question. She stood slowly, her movements mechanical. Patricia watched the light drain from the girl's eyes, watched her fold back into the small, frightened person she'd been when they first met. It was nice meeting you, Ms. Johnson, Charlotte said formally, her voice hollow. The words were Harrison's, not hers, a polite dismissal that satisfied social conventions while ending the interaction cleanly. Patricia felt her heart break a little. She wanted to protest, to give Charlotte her phone number, to to make some arrangement for future contact. But Harrison's presence loomed between them like a wall, and she could see that pushing would only make things worse for Charlotte. "It was nice meeting you too, sweetheart," Patricia said softly. "Take care of yourself." Charlotte nodded, not trusting her voice. She turned to follow Harrison toward the mall's exit, her shoulders hunched with defeat. But as they walked away, Patricia called out, "Charlotte!" Both Charlotte and Harrison turned back. "Remember what we talked about," Patricia said, her voice carrying across the distance between them. "About extra colors on the palette. You're not broken, baby. You're beautiful exactly as you are." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears, not of overwhelm this time, but of gratitude and loss. She nodded once, quickly, before Harrison's hand on her elbow guided her firmly away. Patricia watched them disappear into the crowd, Harrison's authoritative stride and Charlotte's reluctant shuffle, and felt something she hadn't experienced in months: righteous anger. Not at Charlotte, who was clearly doing her best to manage in a world that didn't understand her. Not even entirely at Harrison, who was probably genuinely trying to protect her in the only way he knew how. But at a system that could leave a remarkable young woman feeling so alone, so convinced of her own brokenness, that a 20-minute conversation with a stranger could feel revolutionary. Patricia's phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "How was the drive? Feel better?" She stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, different than expected. "But yeah, I think I do. In the parking garage." Harrison walked Charlotte to the waiting black Mercedes, his silence heavy with disapproval. The driver, Tony, nodded respectfully as he opened the rear door. "Thank you for waiting, Tony," Harrison said. "We'll head directly home now." Charlotte slid into the leather seat, staring out the tinted window as they pulled out of the parking garage. The October sun was beginning to set, casting golden light across the New Jersey landscape. "Charlotte," Harrison said finally, his voice gentler but still firm, "I need you to understand why I intervened back there." She didn't respond, just continued staring out the window. "Your father entrusts me with your safety and well-being. That includes protecting you from people who might try to take advantage of your trusting nature." "She wasn't taking advantage," Charlotte said quietly. "Perhaps not consciously," Harrison conceded. "But you have to understand. People see you, they see your clothes, your jewelry, the car that picks you up. They make assumptions about your family's wealth. Not everyone who shows you kindness has pure motives." Charlotte turned to look at him for the first time since leaving the mall. "You think she was pretending to care about me?" Harrison's expression softened slightly. He'd known Charlotte since she was 8 years old, had watched her struggle with social cues and rejection, had seen how desperately she wanted connection with her peers. His protective instincts, honed by years of managing security concerns and social climbers, sometimes overcame his sensitivity to her emotional needs. "I think she seemed genuinely concerned," he admitted. "But that doesn't mean it was appropriate for you to share personal information with her. Your father specifically asked me to help you practice better judgment about these kinds of interactions." Charlotte felt the familiar shame creep up her neck. Even when adults acknowledged her feelings, they somehow managed to make her feel childish and naive for having them. "She understood about the sensory stuff," Charlotte said. "She knew what was happening without me having to explain it." "Your therapists understand too," Harrison pointed out. "Dr. Richardson has been working with you for months on coping strategies." "Dr. Richardson talks about me like I'm a problem to be solved," Charlotte said with sudden bitterness. "Patricia talked to me like I was a person." Harrison was quiet for a moment, considering this. He'd sat in on enough therapy sessions to know Charlotte wasn't entirely wrong. The clinical approach, while well-intentioned, sometimes reduced her to a collection of symptoms rather than treating her as a complete individual. "I understand you felt heard," he said carefully. "But you have to be careful about trusting strangers, even kind ones. The world isn't always safe for someone in your position. Charlotte knew he was right, logically. She'd grown up with security protocols and background checks, with warnings about people who might try to befriend her for the wrong reasons. But Patricia hadn't felt like a threat. She'd felt like the first real connection Charlotte had made in years. "What if I never see her again?" Charlotte asked, her voice small. "Then you'll remember a nice conversation with a kind woman," Harrison said. "And you'll be safe." Safe. The word had become a cage over the years, protecting her from potential harm while also isolating her from potential joy. Charlotte understood the necessity, but she was beginning to question whether safety was worth the loneliness. As they drove through the familiar streets toward her father's estate in Alpine, Charlotte made a decision. She would remember more than just a nice conversation. She would remember what it felt like to be seen, understood, accepted. And somehow, she would find a way to feel that again, even if it meant taking risks that Harrison, and her father, would never approve of. Back at the mall, Patricia sat in her Honda for a long time after Charlotte and Harrison had driven away, processing what had just happened. The encounter had stirred up emotions she'd been trying to keep buried. Grief over Marcus, anger at a world that made people like him and Charlotte feel defective, and something else she was afraid to name: hope. For 2 years, she'd been drifting through life, going through the motions of survival without any real sense of purpose. Her job at Target was temporary, her apartment was just a place to sleep, her days blended together in a haze of quiet desperation. But 20 minutes with Charlotte had reminded her of something she'd forgotten. She was good at seeing people who felt invisible. She was good at offering the kind of acceptance that could transform someone's entire day, maybe even their entire sense of self. It was a gift Marcus had helped her recognize years ago, when he was struggling to find his place in the world, and she was the only person who seemed to really understand him. "You make people feel safe, Mom," he told her once, after she'd helped him through a particularly difficult social situation. "Not safe like nothing bad will happen, but safe like it's okay to be exactly who they are." Charlotte had needed that safety today, and Patricia had been able to provide it. The realization filled her with something she hadn't felt in years. The sense that she mattered, that her presence in the world served a purpose beyond just taking up space. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Her sister's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, Karen," Patricia answered. "You sound different," Karen said immediately. "What happened? Did you meet someone?" Patricia almost laughed. "You could say that. I met a girl at the mall who reminded me of Marcus." "Oh, honey." Karen's voice filled with concern. "Are you okay? Do you want to talk about it?" "Actually," Patricia said, surprising herself, "I think I am okay. More okay than I've been in a long time." She told Karen about Charlotte, about the conversation at the fountain, about Harrison's dismissive intervention. As she talked, she felt the anger and frustration give way to something more constructive: determination. "So what are you going to do?" Karen asked when Patricia finished. "I don't know yet," Patricia admitted. "But I feel like I need to do something. That girl shouldn't have to feel so alone." "Be careful," Karen warned gently. "Rich people have ways of making problems disappear if they want to." Patricia knew her sister was right. Harrison had made it clear that further contact would be unwelcome, possibly even problematic. But she couldn't shake the image of Charlotte's face lighting up when she realized someone understood her, or the way that light had died when Harrison forced their separation. "Maybe you're right," Patricia said. "Maybe I should just let it go." But even as she said the words, she knew she couldn't. Because sometimes doing the right thing required taking risks, and Charlotte deserved to know that someone in the world saw her as perfect exactly as she was. Charlotte sat at her bedroom window, watching the first drops of rain streak down the glass. The October storm had rolled in faster than the weather service predicted, turning the late afternoon sky an ominous shade of gray-green that made the trees in her father's meticulously landscaped yard look like dark sentinels against the approaching darkness. Her Mandarin tutor had canceled an hour ago when the rain started in earnest, leaving Charlotte alone with her thoughts and the memory of Patricia's voice saying, "You're not broken, baby. You're beautiful exactly as you are." The words had played on repeat in her mind during the uncomfortable ride home with Harrison, through the stilted dinner conversation with the household staff, and now as she watched the storm gather strength outside her window. Her phone buzzed with a text from Harrison. "Your father called from Singapore. He'll be home Tuesday evening. Please review your schedule for next week and let me know if you have any conflicts." Charlotte stared at the message without responding. Tuesday was 4 days away. 4 more days of careful supervision, structured activities, and the kind of well-meaning isolation that had become her normal existence. She pulled up her phone's weather app and frowned at what she saw. The storm wasn't supposed to peak until much later, but the radar showed an angry red mass of precipitation moving through northern New Jersey with unusual intensity. The forecast had changed from light rain to severe thunderstorm warning in the space of an hour. A memory surfaced suddenly. Patricia mentioning that she worked at Target, that she'd just finished a shift. Which Target? There were several in the area, but given that she'd been at Westfield Garden State Plaza, Charlotte's fingers moved before her rational mind could stop them, pulling up Google Maps and searching for Target locations near the mall. There it was, Target Paramus, less than 2 miles from where they'd met. Patricia had probably driven straight from work to the mall, maybe was even heading back there now as the storm intensified. Another crash of thunder, closer this time, made Charlotte jump. She'd always been sensitive to loud noises, but storms were different. Storms were nature's version of sensory overload, and she'd learned years ago that the only thing worse than experiencing them alone was trying to pretend they didn't bother her. Her mother used to sit with her during thunderstorms, playing soft music and braiding her hair until the worst of it passed. After the accident, Charlotte had faced every storm alone, either hiding under her comforter or taking anxiety medication that left her feeling foggy and disconnected. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, she found herself thinking about someone else who might be struggling with the storm. Patricia had mentioned living in Clifton, driving an old Honda. If she was caught in this weather. Charlotte's phone rang, making her heart jump. Harrison's name appeared on the screen. "Charlotte, I'm sure you can see the storm's getting worse," he said without preamble. "I'm going to stay in my apartment tonight rather than try to drive home to Hoboken. The Weather Service is predicting flash flooding, and several roads are already closed." "Okay," Charlotte said, though something in her chest tightened. Harrison lived in the guest apartment above the garage, close enough to respond to emergencies, but far enough away that she'd spend the night essentially alone in the main house. "Mrs. Jerome left dinner in the refrigerator before she went home," Harrison continued. "I'll check on you in a few hours, but call if you need anything. And Charlotte, stay inside. This isn't the kind of weather for one of your walks." Charlotte often took long walks around the estate when she felt overwhelmed, a coping mechanism her therapist had encouraged. But Harrison was right. Tonight wasn't safe for that. After hanging up, Charlotte returned to her window. The rain was coming down in sheets now, and the wind was strong enough to bend the oak trees that had stood in the yard since before she was born. The storm drains couldn't keep up. Water was beginning to pool in the driveway and overflow onto the normally pristine lawn. She thought about Patricia somewhere out there in this weather, maybe trying to get home in a 12-year-old car that probably didn't handle flooding well. The thought made her stomach clench with worry for a woman she'd known for less than an hour, but who had shown her more genuine understanding than most people she'd known for years. Charlotte was still standing at the window when her phone rang again. This time, the number was unfamiliar. "Hello," she answered hesitantly. "Charlotte, this is Patricia Johnson. We met at the mall today." Charlotte's heart leaped. "Patricia! How did you get my number? Your friend Harrison gave it to me, Patricia said, and Charlotte could hear something strained in her voice. Well, not exactly. I'm at Westfield Garden State Plaza, and there's been an accident in the parking garage. They're not letting anyone leave until the emergency crews clear the scene, and with this storm. Are you okay? Charlotte interrupted, pressing the phone closer to her ear. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just stuck. The thing is, they're saying it could be hours before we can get our cars out, and some of the people here don't have anywhere to go. The mall's closing, but they're letting us wait in the main corridor until the road's clear and the parking situation gets sorted out. Charlotte felt her pulse quicken. Where exactly are you? Near that fountain where we met earlier. There's about 30 of us here, families with kids, some elderly folks, a few teenagers who can't reach their parents. It's not ideal, but we're making the best of it. That sounds awful, Charlotte said, imagining the sensory nightmare of being trapped in a mall with 30 strangers during a severe storm. Actually, that's why I'm calling, Patricia said carefully. I remembered you mentioning that you live in Alpine, and I was wondering. Well, this might be completely inappropriate, and I understand if you say no, but would it be possible for some of us to wait out the storm somewhere more comfortable? I know it's a lot to ask, especially after what happened with Harrison earlier. Charlotte's mind raced. Patricia was asking to bring strangers to her father's house, people Harrison didn't know and hadn't vetted. It was exactly the kind of security risk that would send him into crisis management mode. But 30 people trapped in a closed mall during a severe storm sounded like Charlotte's personal version of hell, and if Patricia was struggling with it too. How many people? Charlotte asked. Well, some folks have managed to find other arrangements. But there's an elderly couple whose car won't start, a single mom with 2 young kids whose apartment complex is flooding, and a few others. Maybe 10 people total. 10 strangers in her father's house. Harrison would absolutely lose his mind. I'd have to ask Harrison, Charlotte said slowly. Of course. And Charlotte, I want you to know that I wouldn't ask if it wasn't really necessary. These people need help, and honestly, I could use a friendly face right now too. Something in Patricia's voice, a vulnerability she was trying to hide, made Charlotte's decision for her. What's your location exactly? Charlotte asked. I'll figure out the logistics. 20 minutes later, Charlotte was standing in Harrison's apartment doorway, rain dripping from her hair and her heart pounding with nervous energy. She'd run through the storm to reach the garage, her anxiety about the conversation ahead overwhelming her usual sensory sensitivities. Harrison opened the door in his pajamas and robe, his expression immediately shifting to concern when he saw her bedraggled state. Charlotte, what on earth are you doing out in this weather? I need to ask you something, she said, water pooling at her feet on his welcome mat. And I need you to say yes. Harrison stepped aside to let her in, grabbing a towel from his linen closet. What's wrong? Are you hurt? I'm fine. But there are people trapped at the mall because of the storm, and they need somewhere safe to wait it out. Harrison's expression shifted from concern to wariness. People. Including Patricia, Charlotte said quickly. The woman from today. She called me because she remembered I lived in Alpine, and she has nowhere else to turn. Absolutely not, Harrison said immediately. Charlotte, you cannot invite strangers into your father's home. The security protocols alone dash. They're not strangers to her, Charlotte interrupted. She's trying to help an elderly couple and a mother with kids. People who really need assistance. That's admirable, but it's not our responsibility. There are emergency shelters, hotels dash. The roads are flooded, Charlotte said. And Harrison, she helped me today. When I was having a panic attack and everyone else just walked by, she stopped. She cared. Doesn't that matter? Harrison studied Charlotte's face, seeing something there he hadn't noticed in months. Passion, determination, genuine concern for others rather than just her own struggles. How many people are we talking about? He asked finally. 10. Maybe fewer. 10 people. In your father's house. While he's out of the country. Harrison rubbed his temples. Charlotte, if anything goes wrong What could go wrong? They're stuck in a storm, not planning a heist. You don't understand the liability issues. If someone gets hurt on the property, if anything goes missing, if your father finds out I allowed this Then don't allow it, Charlotte said quietly. Let me allow it. It's my house too. Harrison stared at her, surprised by the quiet authority in her voice. In 8 years of managing her care, he'd rarely seen Charlotte assert herself so directly. Why is this so important to you? He asked. Charlotte was quiet for a moment, struggling to articulate feelings she was still processing herself. Because for the first time in 3 years, someone saw me as a person instead of a problem, she said finally. Because she made me feel less alone. And because if I don't help when I have the chance, what kind of person does that make me? Thunder crashed overhead, punctuating her words. Through Harrison's window, they could see water rushing down the driveway in rivers. Harrison sighed deeply. If I agree to this, and I'm not saying I am, there would have to be strict ground rules. Everyone stays in the main living areas. No one goes upstairs or into your father's private spaces. I meet everyone before they enter the house. And at the first sign of any problems, everyone leaves. Charlotte felt hope flare in her chest. You'll consider it? I'll consider it because you've never asked me for anything like this before. And because... He paused, looking uncomfortable. Because maybe I was too harsh with that woman today. If she's genuinely trying to help people in need, that speaks well of her character. She is, Charlotte said eagerly. She's kind and patient, and she understands things that other people don't understand. All right, Harrison said, already reaching for his phone. But we do this properly. I'll call her directly, speak to everyone who's coming, and set clear expectations. And Charlotte, this doesn't change anything about your father's security concerns. This is a one-time emergency exception. Charlotte nodded rapidly, not caring about future restrictions as long as she could help Patricia now. As Harrison dialed Patricia's number, Charlotte felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The satisfaction of taking action instead of just accepting whatever adults decided was best for her. For once, she was choosing connection over safety, compassion over convenience. And despite her nervousness about the evening ahead, it felt like the rightest choice she'd ever made. 45 minutes later, Charlotte stood in the main foyer of her father's house, watching through the sidelights as headlights appeared through the storm. Harrison had driven his BMW to the mall to collect their unexpected guests, since the parking garage situation was still unresolved and several of their cars were trapped anyway. Charlotte smoothed her dry clothes. She'd changed into a soft purple sweater and dark jeans, and tried to calm her racing heart. She'd spent the time while Harrison was gone preparing, setting out towels, making coffee, arranging the main living room to accommodate several people comfortably. The front door opened, and Harrison stepped inside first, followed by a group of bedraggled but grateful-looking people. Patricia came through last, and when her eyes met Charlotte's across the foyer, her face lit up with a smile that made Charlotte's chest feel warm and tight. You didn't have to do this, Patricia said, approaching Charlotte while the others clustered near the door, clearly overwhelmed by the grandeur of their surroundings. Yes, I did, Charlotte said simply. You helped me today. Now I get to help you. Patricia looked like she might cry. Thank you, sweetheart. This means more than you know. As Harrison began introductions and explanations of the house rules, Charlotte realized that for the first time in 3 years, Her home didn't feel like a beautiful prison. It felt like a place where good things could happen. The living room had been transformed into an impromptu refuge. Margaret and Frank Rodriguez, the elderly couple whose car had broken down, sat together on the cream-colored sofa, sharing a cup of tea and marveling quietly at the oil paintings that lined the walls. Jenny Martinez, a young mother in her late 20s, had finally gotten her twin 4-year-olds, Luis and Sophia, settled on the Persian rug with some of Charlotte's old picture books that Harrison had retrieved from storage. 3 other stranded mall employees, Kevin from the electronics store, Ashley from Bath & Body Works, and Tom from the food court, sat around the coffee table playing cards they'd found in the entertainment center. The atmosphere was surprisingly comfortable, considering these strangers had been thrown together by circumstance in a house that probably cost more than most of them would earn in a lifetime. Charlotte moved between the groups like a nervous hostess, refilling coffee cups and adjusting throw pillows, unused to having so many people in her home but finding she enjoyed the gentle chaos of conversation and movement. The sensory input that would normally overwhelm her felt manageable somehow, buffered by Patricia's calm presence and the sense of purpose that came from helping others. Patricia stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the back garden, watching the storm rage outside. Lightning illuminated the swimming pool and tennis court, both now partially flooded from the unprecedented rainfall. She'd changed into dry clothes Charlotte had provided, a soft gray cardigan that was slightly too large and dark blue jeans that fit surprisingly well. "Your home is beautiful," Patricia said as Charlotte approached with a fresh cup of coffee. "It's my father's house," Charlotte corrected automatically, then caught herself. "I mean, thank you. It never feels quite real to me, if that makes sense." Patricia studied Charlotte's face in the warm lamplight. "What do you mean?" Charlotte glanced around the room, taking in the expensive furnishings, the artwork, the casual luxury that surrounded them. "It's like living in a museum sometimes. Beautiful, but not quite alive. Not like when my mother was here." "Tell me about her," Patricia said softly, settling into one of the armchairs by the window. Charlotte curled up in the matching chair, tucking her legs beneath her in a way that made her look younger than her 15 years. "Her name was Eleanor," Charlotte began, her voice taking on a dreamy quality. "She was an artist, a painter. She had this studio on the 3rd floor where she worked, and it was the only room in the house that ever felt messy and real and lived in." Charlotte's eyes grew distant as she spoke. She painted these incredible landscapes, but they weren't like photographs. They were more like feelings made visible. She said she painted the emotions that places held, not just what they looked like. "She sounds gifted," Patricia said. "She was. But more than that, she was." Charlotte struggled for words. "She made space for things to be imperfect. When I was little and didn't understand why other kids seemed to know social rules that no one had ever taught me, she never made me feel like I was the problem. She'd say that I was just tuned to a different frequency, and that someday I'd find my people who could hear the same music I did." Patricia felt her throat tighten. "She sounds like she understood you completely." "She did. When I got overwhelmed at school events or birthday parties, she wouldn't force me to push through it. She'd take me somewhere quiet and let me recover. She called it refueling. She'd braid my hair or let me sort through her art supplies until I felt ready to try again." Charlotte's voice grew softer. "The night before she died, I'd had a meltdown at a school dance. Some girls were making fun of the way I stimmied when I got excited, and I just broke down. Completely. Dad was mortified, but Mom just took me home and ran me a bath with lavender oil. She sat on the bathroom floor and told me stories about famous artists who were different, who saw the world in ways other people couldn't understand." "What kind of stories?" "About Van Gogh and his intensity, Frida Kahlo and her pain that became beauty, Georgia O'Keeffe, and how she painted things so differently that people didn't know what to make of her at first. She said being different wasn't a flaw to fix. It was a gift that came with responsibilities. Patricia leaned forward slightly. What kind of responsibilities? To use your different way of seeing to create something beautiful, or to help other people feel less alone, or to show the world perspectives it might never consider otherwise. Charlotte's voice cracked slightly. She said that my sensitivity wasn't a weakness. It was like having a more powerful antenna. I could pick up signals other people missed. Thunder rumbled outside, but softer now, as if the storm was beginning to exhaust itself. Patricia watched Charlotte's face in the lamplight, seeing not the anxious teenager from the mall but glimpses of the confident woman she might become given the right encouragement. What happened to her? Patricia asked gently. Charlotte was quiet for so long that Patricia wondered if she'd pushed too far. But then Charlotte began speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. December 15th, 2021. She was driving home from her art class. She taught a Wednesday evening session at the community center in Englewood. It was raining, not as bad as tonight, but enough to make the roads slick. Charlotte's hands began to tremble slightly. A drunk driver ran a red light at the intersection on Palisade Avenue. Hit her car on the driver's side. Patricia's heart clenched. Oh, sweetheart. She died instantly, they said. That was supposed to make it better somehow, that she didn't suffer. But it didn't make anything better. It just made everything empty. Charlotte looked around the room, at all the expensive things that had remained exactly the same while her entire world had collapsed. Dad couldn't handle it. Couldn't handle losing her. Couldn't handle me without her there to translate between us. 3 weeks after the funeral, he hired Harrison to manage my daily care and threw himself into work. He travels now more than he ever did before. I think being home reminds him too much of what we lost. And you've been dealing with all of this alone, Patricia said, her voice heavy with understanding and anger. I had therapists. Dr. Peterson, Dr. Williams, Dr. Anderson, now Dr. Richardson. They all want to help me develop coping strategies and social skills. But none of them ever just sat with me. Like Mom did. Like you did today. Patricia felt tears gathering in her eyes. This remarkable girl had been carrying such an enormous load of grief and isolation, and everyone around her seemed focused on fixing her rather than simply loving her. Your mother sounds like she was an incredible person, Patricia said. She was. And I miss her every single day. But what makes it worse is that I feel like I lost my dad too. He looks at me now like I'm a problem he doesn't know how to solve. Like if he just finds the right combination of therapy and tutoring and structured activities, I'll become the normal daughter he thinks he's supposed to have. Charlotte wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Sometimes I think he wishes it had been me instead of her. She was the one who knew how to be in the world. I'm just broken. No, Patricia said firmly, leaning forward in her chair. Charlotte, look at me. Charlotte raised her eyes, surprised by the intensity in Patricia's voice. You are not broken. You are grieving, and you are lonely, and you are trying to figure out how to exist in a world that suddenly doesn't make sense anymore. That's not broken. That's human. Patricia paused, choosing her words carefully. Can I tell you about my son? Charlotte nodded, settling deeper into her chair. His name was Marcus Anthony Johnson, and he was born on June 3, 2000. 23 years, 4 months, and 12 days of the most beautiful, frustrating, joyful, heartbreaking love I've ever experienced. Patricia's voice took on the same dreamy quality Charlotte's had held when talking about her mother. Marcus was diagnosed with autism when he was 4, but I knew before then that his brain worked differently. As a baby, he'd cry when certain textures touched his skin but would calm down immediately when I played classical music. He walked late but talked early, full sentences by 18 months, but only when he was interested in the topic. Charlotte found herself smiling slightly. What kinds of things interested him? Everything and nothing, depending on the day. For 3 months when he was 6, he was obsessed with weather patterns. He memorized the names of cloud formations and could predict rain by the way birds flew. Then suddenly he switched to dinosaurs and could tell you the dietary habits of creatures that died millions of years ago. He sounds brilliant. He was. But brilliant didn't make school easier for him. Other kids thought he was weird because he'd rock back and forth when he was thinking, or because he'd get so excited about his interests that he'd flap his hands and talk too fast. Teachers got frustrated because he could solve complex math problems in his head, but couldn't remember to turn in his homework. Patricia's expression grew more serious. By the time he got to high school, the social isolation was really wearing on him. He had a few friends, other kids who were different in their own ways, but he struggled with feeling like he didn't belong anywhere. What did you do? What your mother did for you. I reminded him constantly that different wasn't wrong, just different. I helped him find spaces where his intensity was appreciated rather than just tolerated. I advocated for him at school when teachers didn't understand his needs. And when the world became too much, I created quiet spaces where he could just be himself. Charlotte leaned forward. Were you a single mom? Patricia nodded. Marcus's father left when Marcus was 3. Said he didn't sign up to raise a special needs kid. So it was just the 2 of us, figuring it out together. That must have been hard. Some days felt impossible, Patricia admitted. Working multiple jobs to pay for therapies and specialists, fighting with insurance companies, dealing with school administrators who saw Marcus as a problem rather than a person with potential. But he was worth every struggle. Patricia's voice grew softer. When Marcus was 18, he started working part-time at a bookstore in Montclair. The owner, Mrs. Jerome, was this elderly woman who recognized how much Marcus knew about books and didn't care that he sometimes needed to step outside when the store got too crowded. She gave him a chance when other employers saw his autism as a liability. He found his place, Charlotte said. He did. For 5 beautiful years, Marcus thrived there. He had regular customers who specifically asked for his book recommendations. He organized the store's inventory system in a way that made perfect sense to his brain. He even started dating a girl named Rebecca who worked at the coffee shop next door. Charlotte could hear the shift in Patricia's tone, the way happiness was giving way to something darker. What happened? Patricia was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the storm. When she spoke again, her voice was careful and controlled. Marcus had epilepsy. It developed when he was in his early 20s. Sometimes happens with autism, though we didn't know that at first. He had a few seizures, but they seemed manageable with medication. The doctors said he could live a normal life as long as he took his pills and avoided triggers like extreme stress or sleep deprivation. Charlotte felt her stomach clench, sensing where this story was heading. Last year, Mrs. Jerome got sick, cancer, and had to close the bookstore. Marcus was devastated. That job wasn't just work for him. It was his identity, his community, his proof that he belonged somewhere in the world. He started having trouble sleeping, stopped eating regularly, couldn't find another job that understood his needs. The stress triggered more seizures, Charlotte said quietly. Patricia nodded. On February 18, 2023, I came home from my shift at the insurance company and found him on his bedroom floor. He'd had a seizure alone, and this time, her voice broke slightly. This time his brain just couldn't recover. Charlotte felt tears streaming down her face. Patricia, I'm so sorry. The paramedics said he probably didn't suffer, that he was unconscious when it happened. But just like with your mother, that didn't make it hurt less. It just made it final. Patricia wiped her own eyes with the sleeve of Charlotte's borrowed cardigan. After the funeral, I couldn't figure out how to keep living. Marcus had been my purpose for 23 years. Every decision I made was filtered through what was best for him, what would help him thrive, how I could make the world a little more accepting of people like him. Without him, I felt completely lost. Is that why you noticed me today? Charlotte asked. Because I reminded you of him? Patricia considered this. Partly. When I saw you sitting there, overwhelmed and alone, with that look in your eyes like you were drowning, it was so familiar. But it wasn't just about Marcus. It was about recognizing someone who needed what I knew how to give. What's that? Acceptance. The kind of love that doesn't try to change you or fix you or make you smaller to fit into spaces that weren't designed for you. The kind that says, you are exactly who you're supposed to be, and that's enough. Charlotte stared at Patricia through her tears. You saved me today. Do you know that? If you hadn't stopped, if you hadn't asked why I was alone, I don't know what would have happened. You saved me too, Patricia said softly. For the first time in almost 2 years, I remembered what it felt like to matter to someone, to be needed, to use the love I'd been carrying around with nowhere to put it. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who had found in each other exactly what they hadn't known they were looking for. Patricia, Charlotte said finally. Yes, sweetheart. Do you think they'd be proud of us? Your Marcus and my mom, for finding each other. Patricia smiled through her tears. I think they probably had something to do with it. Marcus always said that people who needed each other had a way of finding each other, even when it seemed impossible. Mom used to say that too, that the universe conspired to help kind people find each other. As if summoned by their conversation, Jenny Martinez appeared in the doorway with her sleeping daughter Sophia in her arms. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said quietly, but I wanted to thank you both again. Luis is asleep on the couch, and I can't remember the last time I felt this safe during a storm. You have no idea what this means to a single mom with nowhere else to go. Charlotte and Patricia exchanged a look, both understanding that their own healing was somehow connected to being able to help others. You're welcome to stay as long as you need, Charlotte said, meaning it completely. After Jenny returned to her children, Patricia reached over and took Charlotte's hand. We're going to be okay, she said. Both of us. We're going to figure out how to carry our grief and our love at the same time. Charlotte squeezed Patricia's hand, feeling something settle in her chest that had been restless and aching for 3 long years. For the first time since her mother's death, she wasn't facing her pain alone. Charlotte woke to the sound of quiet laughter drifting up from the kitchen, a sound so foreign in her father's house that for a moment she thought she was dreaming. Pale October sunlight streamed through her bedroom windows, and the silence outside told her the storm had finally passed during the night. She padded downstairs in her pajamas and robe, following the scent of coffee and something sweet baking in the oven. What she found in the kitchen made her stop in the doorway, hardly believing her eyes. Patricia stood at the large granite island, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, wearing the same gray cardigan from the night before over a white t-shirt Charlotte had lent her. She was teaching Sophia Martinez, now fully awake and energetic, how to crack eggs into a mixing bowl, while Luis stood on a step stool beside them, carefully measuring flour under Margaret Rodriguez's patient supervision. Jenny Martinez sat at the breakfast bar, cradling a cup of coffee and watching her children with an expression of contentment Charlotte had rarely seen on an adult's face in this house. Frank Rodriguez was reading sections of the Sunday paper aloud to Kevin, Ashley, and Tom, who were sharing a pot of coffee and debating whether the roads would be clear enough for them to get home. Harrison was nowhere to be seen, but Charlotte could hear the distant sound of his voice on the phone, probably coordinating transportation back to the mall for their guests once the parking garage situation was resolved. Good morning, sleepyhead, Patricia said, looking up from the mixing bowl with a smile that made Charlotte's chest feel warm. We're making pancakes. Hope you don't mind us raiding your kitchen. Sophia wanted to help, Jenny explained apologetically. Patricia offered to teach her, and one thing led to another. I don't mind at all, Charlotte said, and meant it. The kitchen, which usually felt sterile and unused despite its magazine-worthy design, felt alive in a way it hadn't since her mother's death. Can you help us flip them? Sophia asked, bouncing slightly on her toes. Patricia says you need very gentle hands for flipping pancakes, and Mama says I have gentle hands. You do have gentle hands, Charlotte said, accepting the spatula Patricia offered her. But I should warn you, I'm not much of a cook. That's okay, Luis piped up from his position at the flour canister. Patricia says cooking is just like painting, except you eat the art when you're done. Charlotte glanced at Patricia, who shrugged with a small smile. It's true. Your mother would have understood that. For the next hour, Charlotte found herself immersed in the simple pleasure of making breakfast with people who seemed genuinely happy to be there. Patricia guided her through the process of cooking pancakes that actually held together instead of falling apart in the pan, while Margaret shared stories about teaching her own grandchildren to cook during their summer visits to New Jersey. The children chattered constantly, but their voices didn't overwhelm Charlotte the way children's voices usually did. Maybe it was because Patricia was there, creating a buffer of calm energy, or maybe it was because she felt useful and included rather than awkward and observational. Charlotte, Sophia said as they sat down to eat at the large dining room table, your house is like a castle. Do you have a princess room? Sophia, Jenny said quickly, that's not polite to ask. It's okay, Charlotte said, cutting up her pancakes. I guess my room is kind of like a princess room. Would you like to see it after breakfast? Sophia's eyes went wide with excitement, and Charlotte found herself laughing at the little girl's enthusiasm. When was the last time she'd made a child happy just by being herself? Patricia, Frank Rodriguez said from his seat at the head of the table, these are the best pancakes I've had since my late wife used to make them on Sunday mornings. What's your secret? A little vanilla extract in the batter, Patricia replied. And patience. Most people flip them too early. You should open a restaurant, Ashley suggested. Seriously, I work retail and I eat a lot of mall food, but this is restaurant quality. Patricia laughed, but Charlotte caught something wistful in her expression. I used to think about that sometimes. When Marcus was younger, I'd imagine opening a little cafe where kids like him could work, where being different was considered an asset rather than a problem. Why didn't you? Margaret asked gently. Life got in the way, I suppose. Single motherhood, medical bills, just surviving took up most of my energy. And after Marcus died. Patricia trailed off, then seemed to shake herself. Well, dreams have a way of changing. Charlotte watched Patricia's face, seeing something there she recognized from her own mirror, the look of someone who had stopped believing that good things were possible for them. Maybe they don't have to change, Charlotte said quietly. Maybe they just have to wait for the right time. Patricia met her eyes across the table, and something passed between them. Not just understanding, but possibility. After breakfast, Charlotte did indeed give Sophia a tour of her room, which the 4-year-old declared better than Elsa's castle. Luis was more interested in Charlotte's collection of astronomy books and the telescope set up by her window. Do you really know about stars? He asked, running his fingers reverently along the telescope's length. A little bit, Charlotte said. Would you like me to show you some constellations? We can't see them now because it's daytime, but I have an app that shows where they are. For 20 minutes, Charlotte found herself explaining the stories behind different star patterns to 2 fascinated children, feeling more confident and natural than she had in any social interaction in years. When Patricia appeared in the doorway to collect them, she paused, watching Charlotte point out Cassiopeia on her phone screen while the twins hung on her every word. You're a natural teacher, Patricia said after the children had run off to find their mother. Charlotte blushed. I don't usually talk to kids much. Other than polite hellos, I mean. But they're so curious. They ask questions because they want to know things, not because they're testing whether I'm normal. That's the beautiful thing about children, Patricia said, settling into Charlotte's reading chair. They haven't learned yet that some people are supposed to be different in ways that matter and others aren't. Charlotte curled up on her bed, facing Patricia. The morning light streaming through her windows made everything feel softer, more dreamlike. Can I ask you something? Charlotte said. Of course. Last night, when you were talking about Marcus, you mentioned that you used to imagine opening a cafe. What would it have been like? Patricia's expression grew thoughtful. I had this whole vision worked out in my head. A small place, maybe 20 tables, with really good coffee and simple food made from scratch. But the special thing would be the staff. I wanted to hire people that other places wouldn't give a chance to. People on the autism spectrum, people with social anxiety, people who just needed someone to believe in them. Charlotte leaned forward, intrigued. What would make it different from other restaurants? Well, for one thing, we'd have quiet hours. Times when the music was softer and the lighting was dimmer for people who got overwhelmed by too much sensory input. And the staff wouldn't be required to make small talk with customers if that wasn't their strength. We'd let people be good at what they were good at. That sounds amazing, Charlotte said. Why did you stop thinking about it? Patricia was quiet for a moment. After Marcus died, it felt selfish to dream about something that was just for me. And honestly, I didn't think I was strong enough anymore to help other people when I couldn't even help myself. But you helped me yesterday, Charlotte pointed out. And you helped everyone downstairs. You made Jenny feel safe. You taught Margaret's recipe to Sophia. You made Frank laugh. You're still helping people. Patricia looked at Charlotte with something approaching wonder. You really see things differently, don't you? Is that bad? No, sweetheart. It's extraordinary. You see possibilities where other people see problems. You see hope where other people see endings. Charlotte felt a flutter of pride, remembering her mother's words about her sensitivity being a gift rather than a burden. Patricia, Charlotte said, can I show you something? She led Patricia up to the third floor, to a door that had remained locked since her mother's death. Charlotte had kept the key hidden in her jewelry box, unable to enter the room but unwilling to let Harrison clear it out as her father had suggested. This was my mother's studio, Charlotte said, her hand trembling slightly as she turned the key. The room beyond was exactly as Eleanor Pemberton had left it 3 years ago. Canvases in various stages of completion lined the walls, paintbrushes sat in mason jars filled with turpentine, tubes of oil paint were scattered across the work table in a chaos that somehow made perfect sense. The north-facing windows provided the kind of clear, even light that artists prize, and despite the layer of dust that covered everything, the space still hummed with creative energy. Patricia stepped into the room reverently, taking in the paintings that covered nearly every surface. They were indeed landscapes, but not photographic ones. These were emotional interpretations of places, a stormy ocean that seemed to roil with grief, a sunny meadow that practically vibrated with joy, a winter forest that conveyed both solitude and peace. She was incredibly talented, Patricia said softly. She always said that talent was just the starting point, Charlotte replied. That the real art was in learning to see with your heart instead of just your eyes. Patricia paused in front of a painting that showed a young girl with blonde hair sitting by a pond, surrounded by swirls of color that seemed to represent sound and emotion made visible. Is this you? Patricia asked. Charlotte nodded. She painted it the summer I turned 12. I was going through a really hard time at school, feeling like I didn't fit anywhere. She said she wanted to capture how I experienced the world, all the extra colors and sounds and feelings that other people couldn't see. In the painting, the girl looked overwhelmed but not broken, sensitive but not fragile. The swirls of color around her weren't chaotic. They were complex, beautiful, full of patterns that revealed themselves the longer you looked. "She saw you exactly as you are," Patricia said. "And she thought you were beautiful." Charlotte felt tears gather in her eyes. "I miss her so much. Sometimes I come up here just to remember what it felt like to be understood." Patricia turned from the painting to look at Charlotte directly. "You know that feeling doesn't have to be just a memory, right? You can have that again. You deserve to have that." "With who?" Charlotte asked. "I don't know how to make friends. People my age think I'm weird, and adults either want to fix me or ignore me." "What about with me?" Patricia said simply. Charlotte stared at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we decided to be family? Not the kind you're born into, but the kind you choose. The kind that sees you exactly as you are and thinks you're perfect." Charlotte's breath caught. "But I'm 15. And you barely know me. And my father would never." "Your father isn't here," Patricia said gently. "And age is just a number when it comes to the kind of connection we have. I've felt more understood by you in 24 hours than I have by most people in my entire life." "Really? Really? You listen without trying to fix. You care without judging. You see beauty in things other people miss. Those are rare gifts, Charlotte." Charlotte walked over to her mother's easel, where an unfinished painting of a sunrise still waited for colors that would never come. "What would it mean?" she asked quietly. "Being chosen family? It would mean that you'd have someone who believes in you completely. Someone who celebrates the things that make you different instead of trying to change them. Someone who shows up when you need them and lets you show up for them too." Patricia joined Charlotte by the easel. It would mean that you'd never have to sit alone in a mall again, because you'd know that someone in the world is thinking about you and hoping you're okay. "And what would I give you?" Charlotte asked. Patricia smiled. "You'd give me a reason to dream again. You'd let me be the kind of person Marcus always said I was, someone who makes the world softer for people who need it to be softer." Charlotte looked around the studio, at her mother's paintings and brushes and the creative chaos that had once filled this space with life and purpose. "I think my mom would like you," she said finally. "I think I would have loved her," Patricia replied. "And I think she'd be proud of the remarkable person her daughter is becoming." Charlotte felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening onto a room she'd forgotten existed. For 3 years, she'd been living in a world that felt too small, too quiet, too empty of the kind of love that didn't come with conditions or expectations. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay. Okay, let's be family. The chosen kind." Patricia's face lit up with a joy so pure it made the dusty studio seem to glow. She opened her arms, and Charlotte stepped into a hug that felt like coming home after a very long journey. They stood there for a long time, surrounded by Eleanor Pemberton's paintings and the promise of a future that neither of them had dared to imagine the day before. Downstairs, they could hear the sounds of their houseguests preparing to leave, bags zipping, children laughing, adults exchanging phone numbers and promises to stay in touch. Harrison was coordinating rides, probably eager to return the house to its usual quiet order. But Charlotte and Patricia remained in the studio, holding on to each other and the fragile, beautiful thing they discovered in the midst of an unexpected storm. "Patricia," Charlotte said, her voice muffled against the older woman's shoulder. "Yes, sweetheart. I love you too." Patricia's arms tightened around her. "I love you too, baby. More than you know." And for the first time in 3 years, Charlotte believed that she was exactly where she belonged. Charlotte was in the kitchen with Patricia, learning how to make her grandmother's recipe for cornbread, when they heard the front door slam with enough force to rattle the windows. Both women froze, Charlotte's hand still gripping the wooden spoon she'd been using to stir the batter. "He's not supposed to be back until 8, Charlotte whispered, her face going pale. Patricia set down the measuring cup she'd been holding and moved instinctively closer to Charlotte, her protective instincts flaring. In the 3 days since the storm, she'd been staying in one of the guest rooms at Charlotte's insistence and Harrison's reluctant agreement. They'd fallen into an easy routine, morning coffee together, afternoon walks around the estate's gardens, evening conversations that lasted until Charlotte fell asleep curled up next to Patricia on the living room couch. It had been the happiest 3 days of Charlotte's life since her mother's death, and the most purposeful 3 days of Patricia's life since losing Marcus. "Charlotte Elizabeth Pemberton." Robert Pemberton's voice boomed through the house, carrying the particular tone of a man accustomed to immediate obedience. "Where are you?" Charlotte's entire body went rigid, her breathing becoming shallow and quick. Patricia recognized the signs of an approaching panic attack and gently took the spoon from Charlotte's trembling hand. "It's okay," Patricia said softly. "Whatever happens, we'll handle it together." "You don't understand," Charlotte whispered. "He's going to be furious. Harrison wasn't supposed to tell him about you staying here, but he must have found out somehow." Heavy footsteps echoed through the marble foyer, accompanied by the sound of expensive luggage being dropped without care. Robert Pemberton appeared in the kit doorway moments later, and Charlotte immediately understood why her father commanded such respect in boardrooms around the world. At 52, Robert was tall and imposing, with steel-gray hair and piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. His charcoal Armani suit was wrinkled from 18 hours of travel, but his presence filled the room with a kind of authority that came from controlling billion-dollar decisions on a daily basis. His jaw was set in a hard line, and his gaze swept the kitchen like a general surveying a battlefield. When his eyes landed on Patricia, something cold and calculating flickered across his features. "So you're the woman who's been playing house with my daughter," he said, his voice deceptively calm. Patricia straightened to her full height, meeting Robert's gaze without flinching. "My name is Patricia Johnson, Mr. Pemberton. Charlotte and I met at the mall on Saturday, and she was kind enough to offer me shelter during the storm." "Shelter," Robert repeated, the word dripping with skepticism. "For 3 days. Dad, please," Charlotte began, her voice small and frightened. "Patricia helped me when I was having a panic attack. She understood about my autism in ways that—" "Enough," Robert cut her off sharply. "Charlotte, go to your room. I need to speak with Ms. Johnson privately." "No," Charlotte said, surprising everyone in the room, including herself. "I'm not leaving." Robert's eyebrows rose dangerously. "Excuse me." "I said no," Charlotte repeated, her voice growing stronger despite her obvious fear. "Patricia is my friend, and whatever you want to say to her, you can say in front of me." Something flickered in Robert's eyes, perhaps surprise that his typically compliant daughter was showing defiance, or maybe anger that she was doing so in front of an outsider. "Very well," he said, his tone becoming even more controlled. "Ms. Johnson, I've spent the last 24 hours having my security team conduct a thorough background check on you. Would you like to know what they found?" Patricia's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression steady. "I have nothing to hide." "Don't you?" Robert smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Patricia Marie Johnson, age 42, currently unemployed after being terminated from Meridian Insurance Company for excessive absences. Living in a one-bedroom apartment in Clifton, 3 months behind on rent. Previous employment history shows a pattern of job instability dating back 5 years. Charlotte watched in horror as her father systematically dismantled Patricia's dignity with the cold precision of a corporate raider destroying a competitor. "You filed for bankruptcy in 2022, Robert continued relentlessly. "Your credit score is currently 487. Your son Marcus died in February 2023, and since then you've been collecting unemployment benefits while working part-time at Target, a job you've held for exactly 3 weeks. Dad, stop, Charlotte said, her voice breaking. Robert ignored her, his attention focused entirely on Patricia. Tell me, Ms. Johnson, what would motivate a woman in your financial situation to befriend the 15-year-old daughter of a billionaire? What could you possibly hope to gain? Patricia felt each word like a physical blow. Every struggle, every private shame, every moment of desperation she'd endured since Marcus's death was being weaponized against her. But what hurt most was watching Charlotte's face crumple with each revelation, seeing the doubt creep into the girl's eyes. I wasn't looking to gain anything, Patricia said quietly. Your daughter was in distress, and I helped her. That's all. How convenient, Robert said. And I suppose it was also convenient that this help resulted in you moving into my home for 3 days, eating my food, enjoying my hospitality. I offered to leave several times, Patricia said. Charlotte asked me to stay. Charlotte is a child, Robert snapped. A vulnerable child with a documented disability who forms inappropriate attachments to adults who show her attention. She doesn't understand when she's being manipulated. I'm not manipulating her, Patricia said, her voice rising slightly. Aren't you? Robert moved closer, his presence intimidating. A woman in your situation, desperate for money, suddenly takes interest in a lonely, wealthy teenager. You've had 3 days to learn about this house, about our security systems, about Charlotte's routines and vulnerabilities. Tell me that's not valuable information. Charlotte felt something breaking inside her chest. Not her heart, that had been broken before. This was worse. This was the destruction of hope itself. You think I'm stupid, she said, her voice hollow. You think I'm so pathetic and desperate for attention that I can't tell when someone is using me. Charlotte, that's not what Robert began. Yes, it is, Charlotte interrupted, tears streaming down her face. That's exactly what you think. That I'm too broken and naive to recognize genuine kindness. That anyone who could possibly care about me must have ulterior motives. Patricia stepped forward, her heart breaking for the pain in Charlotte's voice. Sweetheart, that's not true. What we have is real. Is it? Charlotte turned to Patricia, her blue eyes swimming with hurt and confusion. Because everything he just said is true, isn't it? You are broke. You did lose your job. You are living in my father's house, eating his food. Yes, but... So maybe he's right, Charlotte said, her voice becoming smaller. Maybe I am just a stupid, lonely kid who fell for the first person who was nice to her. Charlotte, no, Patricia said desperately. You're not stupid. What we have isn't about money or houses or any of that. I care about you because of who you are. Robert laughed harshly. How touching. And I suppose it's just coincidence that you care so deeply about someone who happens to stand to inherit several $billion. I didn't even know who she was when I first talked to her, Patricia said. Of course you didn't, Robert said with mock belief. You just happened to approach a well-dressed teenager sitting alone in an upscale mall, and it never occurred to you that she might come for money. Patricia felt the trap closing around her. Every truth could be twisted into evidence of manipulation, every kindness reframed as calculation. Dad, please stop, Charlotte begged. You're destroying everything good in my life. I'm protecting you, Robert said, his voice softening slightly as he looked at his daughter. This is what I do, Charlotte. I identify threats and neutralize them before they can cause harm. She's not a threat, Charlotte said. She's the first person since Mom died who made me feel like I mattered. You matter to me, Robert said. No, I don't, Charlotte replied with devastating honesty. I'm a problem you pay other people to manage. A reminder of what you lost. An obligation you fulfill but don't enjoy. Robert flinched as if she'd slapped him. That's not true. When was the last time you asked me about my day without Harrison prompting you? When was the last time you hugged me without it being a scheduled goodbye before a business trip? When was the last time you looked at me and saw something other than Mom's death and your own guilt? The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of Charlotte's quiet sobs. Robert's face had gone ashen, his corporate confidence cracking to reveal something raw and wounded underneath. "Charlotte," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "I know I haven't been the father you needed since your mother died. But this woman held me while I cried about missing Mom," Charlotte interrupted. "She taught me how to cook and told me stories about her son and made me feel like being different was okay. She didn't try to fix me or change me or make me more convenient to love." Patricia watched the exchange with a growing sense of helplessness. She could see the pain in both father and daughter, could understand how grief had driven them apart. But she also knew that Robert's accusations, however unfairly delivered, contained enough truth to be damaging. "Maybe I should go," Patricia said quietly. "Yes," Robert said immediately. "You should." "No," Charlotte said desperately, turning to Patricia with panic in her eyes. "Don't leave me. Please. You promised we were family." Patricia felt her heart shatter completely. Looking at Charlotte's tear-streaked face, she saw not just the teenager she'd grown to love, but also Marcus at 15, begging her not to let the school transfer him to a different program, terrified of being abandoned by the one person who understood him. "I promised a lot of things I had no right to promise," Patricia said, her voice thick with tears. "Your father is right about some things, Charlotte. I am broke. I am desperate. And maybe I did let myself get too attached because I was lonely and you reminded me of my son." Charlotte's face went white. "You don't mean that." "I don't know what I mean anymore," Patricia said, hating herself for the words even as they left her mouth. "Maybe it's better if I go before this gets more complicated." "There," Robert said with grim satisfaction. "You see." When confronted with the truth, she's already backing away. That's not love, Charlotte. That's someone who got caught. Charlotte looked between her father and Patricia, seeing her entire world collapse for the second time in her life. The woman who had promised to be her chosen family was abandoning her, just like everyone else eventually did. The father who claimed to love her saw her as nothing more than a liability to be protected from her own poor judgment. "Fine," Charlotte said, her voice becoming eerily calm. "You win, Dad. Patricia, you can go. And you never have to worry about me being pathetic enough to think someone could actually care about me ever again." She turned and walked out of the kitchen with dignity that was heartbreaking in someone so young. They heard her footsteps on the stairs, then the sound of her bedroom door closing with finality. Robert and Patricia stood in the wreckage of what had been, just moments before, the happiest period of Charlotte's life in years. "I hope you're satisfied," Patricia said, her voice hollow. "I'm protecting my daughter," Robert replied, but there was no triumph in his voice. "No," Patricia said, gathering what remained of her composure. "You're teaching her that love is conditional, that trust is dangerous, and that she's not worth fighting for. Congratulations, Mr. Pemberton. You've ensured that your daughter will never risk being hurt again. You've also ensured that she'll never risk being happy." She walked toward the kitchen door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I wasn't using her. I loved her exactly as she was. But I guess that doesn't matter now." Patricia left Robert standing alone in his perfect kitchen, surrounded by the echo of his daughter's sobs and the weight of his own terrible victory. Charlotte hadn't slept. She sat at her bedroom window, still wearing the same clothes from the night before, watching the October sunrise paint the estate's grounds in shades of gold and amber. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from Patricia and 43 unread text messages that she hadn't been able to bring herself to open. The house felt different now. Emptier. Even though Patricia had only been there for 3 days, her absence left a void that seemed to echo through every room. The kitchen where they'd made cornbread together, the living room where they'd talked until midnight, the art studio where they'd declared themselves chosen family. All of it felt like a museum of something beautiful that had been destroyed before it could fully bloom. Harrison appeared in her doorway with a breakfast tray, his expression carefully neutral. "You need to eat something." "I'm not hungry," Charlotte said without turning around. "Your father asked me to tell you that he's flying to Tokyo this afternoon. He'll be gone for 10 days. Charlotte finally looked at Harrison, seeing something in his expression that surprised her. "You think he was wrong, don't you?" Harrison set the tray on her desk and sat in her reading chair, abandoning his usual formal posture. At 68, he'd been managing wealthy families for over 3 decades, and he'd seen enough human drama to recognize genuine emotion when he witnessed it. "I think your father loves you very much," he said carefully. "I also think he's terrified of losing you the way he lost your mother." "So he pushes away anyone who makes me happy?" "He pushes away anyone he can't control," Harrison corrected gently. "It's not about Patricia specifically. It's about his fear that if he's not managing every aspect of your life, something terrible will happen." Charlotte turned back to the window. Well, something terrible did happen. Just not the kind he was trying to prevent. Harrison was quiet for a moment, watching Charlotte's profile in the morning light. He'd known her since she was 8 years old, had watched her struggle through her mother's death and her father's emotional retreat. In all that time, he'd never seen her as animated and genuinely happy as she'd been during Patricia's stay. "Can I tell you something that might change how you see what happened last night?" Harrison asked. Charlotte nodded without looking at him. "Your father called me from Singapore at 3 in the morning on Monday, demanding to know why there were unknown people in his house. When I explained about the storm and Patricia, his first question wasn't about security or money. It was whether you seemed happy." Charlotte turned to stare at him. "What?" "I told him that you were more engaged and confident than I'd seen you in years. That you were laughing, helping others, showing leadership qualities I didn't know you possessed." His response was to ask me to run a background check on Patricia because he couldn't understand what someone would want from you other than money. "That's worse, not better," Charlotte said bitterly. "Is it? Or is it a father who's been so destroyed by grief that he can't imagine anyone loving his daughter for who she is rather than what she represents?" Charlotte felt something shift in her chest. "Are you defending him?" "I'm trying to help you understand him," Harrison said. "Your father spent 3 years watching you struggle, hiring therapists and tutors and specialists, trying everything he could think of to help you heal. Nothing worked. Then a stranger shows up for 3 days and suddenly you're thriving. Instead of being grateful, he was terrified. Terrified of what? Of being replaced. Of discovering that he was the problem all along. Of facing the possibility that his daughter needed something he couldn't provide." Charlotte absorbed this, feeling the anger she'd been carrying begin to transform into something more complex. "That still doesn't excuse what he did to Patricia," she said. "No, it doesn't," Harrison agreed. "But it might explain why he did it." Charlotte's phone buzzed with another text message. This time, she looked at it. "Patricia, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know that everything I told you was true. I love you exactly as you are. I'm sorry I let your father's words make me doubt that." Charlotte stared at the message, tears filling her eyes. "She's been trying to reach you all night," Harrison said gently. "I know. Are you going to respond?" Charlotte was quiet for a long time. What if Dad was right? What if I am just a lonely kid who fell for someone who was using me? What does your heart tell you? My heart tells me that Patricia saw me the way Mom used to see me. Like I was exactly who I was supposed to be. Charlotte's voice broke slightly. But what if my heart is wrong? Harrison stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where Charlotte and Patricia had walked together just days before. I've worked for your family for 8 years, he said finally. I've seen dozens of people try to get close to you and your father for money, status, connections. They all have a certain quality. They're performative, calculated, overly interested in your lifestyle and possessions. Patricia moved closer, settling on the floor a few feet away from Charlotte. I saw a beautiful girl who was overwhelmed and alone. I saw someone who was trying very hard to be invisible but whose pain was impossible to miss. I saw someone who reminded me of my son, but more than that, I saw someone who needed what I knew how to give. Which was what? Acceptance. Understanding. The kind of love that doesn't try to change you. Charlotte nodded, tears starting to flow again. And when you got to know me better, when you saw how different I am, how difficult, what did you see then? I saw someone who experiences the world more intensely than most people, which means you feel both pain and joy more deeply. I saw someone with extraordinary empathy and intelligence. I saw someone who was grieving and lonely but who still had room in her heart to care about strangers trapped in a storm. Patricia's voice grew stronger. I saw someone who reminded me why I wanted to keep living. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this. My dad thinks you were pretending to care about me to get something from him. I know. Were you? Patricia looked Charlotte directly in the eyes. No. I wasn't pretending anything. Every moment we spent together, every conversation we had, every feeling I shared with you was completely real. Even though you barely knew me? Charlotte, I knew Marcus for 23 years, and there were parts of his heart I never fully understood. I knew you for 3 days, and I felt like I'd been waiting my whole life to meet you. Sometimes connection isn't about time, it's about recognition. Charlotte picked up one of her mother's paintbrushes, turning it over in her hands. I've been thinking about what you said about chosen family, she said. About how it's different from the kind you're born into. What about it? I think maybe chosen family means you fight for each other. Even when it's hard. Even when other people don't understand. Patricia felt her breath catch. Charlotte. I think it means you don't give up on someone just because loving them is complicated or scary or inconvenient. Charlotte set down the paintbrush and looked at Patricia with a maturity that was startling. I think my dad was wrong about you. But I also think you were wrong to let him convince you that what we have isn't real. Patricia felt tears streaming down her face. Sweetheart, I was trying to protect you. Your father made some valid points about my situation, and I didn't want you to get hurt if he was right about my motives. But he wasn't right, Charlotte said firmly. And even if he was, even if you did initially approach me because you were desperate or lonely or whatever, that doesn't change what happened between us. It doesn't change the fact that you saw me and loved me exactly as I am. Charlotte stood up, her movements decisive. I'm not going to let my father's fear destroy the best thing that's happened to me since my mother died. And I'm not going to let your fear destroy it either. Patricia stared at her, seeing not the overwhelmed teenager from the mall, but a young woman who had found her strength and was choosing to use it. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you want to be my chosen family, then we need to choose each other. Not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. Charlotte held out her hand to Patricia. I'm saying that I love you, and I want you in my life, and I don't care what anyone else thinks about it. The question is, do you want that too? Patricia looked at Charlotte's outstretched hand, then at her face, seeing love and determination and hope that refused to be extinguished. She thought about Marcus, about the way he'd always told her that the most important choice in life was between fear and love. She thought about the empty apartment waiting for her, the life of quiet desperation she'd been planning to return to. Then she thought about Charlotte's laugh, about the way the girl's face lit up when she talked about astronomy, about the 3 days when they both remembered what it felt like to not be alone. Patricia reached out and took Charlotte's hand. "Yes," she said. "I want that more than anything." Charlotte smiled, the first real smile Patricia had seen from her since the confrontation with her father. "Then we need to figure out how to make this work," Charlotte said. "Because I'm not giving up on us." Charlotte stood in the kitchen, carefully arranging homemade chocolate chip cookies on her mother's good china plates. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the space that had become the heart of something extraordinary over the past 3 weeks. The formal dining room sat unused, while this kitchen had become a gathering place for the most unlikely family New Jersey had ever seen. Patricia emerged from the pantry carrying a pitcher of fresh lemonade, her hair pulled back in the messy bun that had become her trademark during their afternoon baking sessions. She wore a flour-dusted apron over a cheerful yellow sundress that Charlotte had bought for her, and her face held the kind of contentment that came from having found her place in the world. "They should be here any minute," Charlotte said, checking the clock on the oven. "Are you nervous?" "A little," Patricia admitted, setting the pitcher on the counter. "It's not every day you meet your chosen daughter's father for the second time, especially when the first meeting went so badly." Charlotte moved to Patricia's side, taking her hand in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing between them. "He's going to love you once he really sees you, just like I did." The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of difficult conversations, careful negotiations, and gradual trust building. After Charlotte and Patricia had reunited in the art studio, they'd spent hours planning how to approach Robert upon his return from Tokyo. Harrison had become an unexpected ally, helping them craft a strategy that addressed Robert's concerns while protecting the bond they'd fought so hard to preserve. The turning point had come when Charlotte had written her father a letter, not an email or text, but an actual handwritten letter on her mother's personal stationery. In it, she'd laid out everything she'd been feeling since Eleanor's death. The loneliness, the sense of being a burden, the way grief had built walls between them that seemed impossible to scale. But more importantly, she'd written about hope, about finding someone who saw her autism as a difference to celebrate rather than a problem to solve, about discovering that chosen family could heal wounds that blood relations sometimes couldn't reach. Robert had returned from Tokyo changed by his daughter's words and 3 sleepless nights thinking about what Harrison had told him regarding Charlotte's happiness during Patricia's stay. The businessman who had built an empire on careful analysis and strategic thinking had been forced to confront the possibility that his protective instincts had become destructive, that his fear of losing Charlotte had been driving her away more effectively than any outside threat ever could. The sound of car doors slamming in the driveway interrupted Charlotte's thoughts. Through the window, she could see her father getting out of his BMW, followed by a woman with short silver hair and kind eyes who moved with the confident grace of someone accustomed to healing rather than harming. "Dr. Sarah Jerome," Patricia said, watching the woman approach. "Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure," Charlotte said firmly. "We need someone neutral to help us all communicate better. And she specializes in family dynamics around neurodiversity. Harrison recommended her." The front door opened, and Robert's voice echoed through the foyer. "Charlotte, we're here." Father and daughter appeared in the kitchen doorway together, Robert looking uncharacteristically uncertain, Dr. Chen carrying a leather satchel and radiating the kind of calm professionalism that immediately put everyone at ease. "Dad," Charlotte said, moving forward to hug him. The embrace lasted longer than usual, both of them holding on to something that had been damaged but not destroyed. "Thank you for coming. For agreeing to this." Robert's eyes found Patricia across the kitchen, and she saw something there she hadn't expected. Not hostility or suspicion, but a kind of weary resignation mixed with genuine curiosity. "Ms. Johnson," he said formally. "Mr. Pemberton," Patricia replied with equal formality. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her presence immediately shifting the dynamic from confrontational to collaborative. "Why don't we all sit down and start with some ground rules for our conversation?" They arranged themselves around the kitchen island. Charlotte and Patricia on one side, Robert and Dr. Chen on the other, with a therapist positioned to facilitate rather than take sides. "Before we discuss the specifics of your relationship," Dr. Chen said, addressing Patricia and Charlotte, "I'd like each person to share what they hope to accomplish today." "Mr. Pemberton." Robert was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming against the granite countertop in a nervous gesture Charlotte recognized from childhood. "I want to understand," he said finally. "I want to understand how my daughter formed such a strong attachment to someone she'd known for 3 days, and I want to understand whether that attachment is healthy or—" He trailed off, struggling for diplomatic language. "Or whether it's the desperate clinging of a lonely child to anyone who shows her attention." Charlotte finished, her voice steady but pointed. Robert flinched. "That's not how I would phrase it." "But it's what you're thinking," Charlotte said. "Dad, I need you to hear something, and I need you to really listen. I'm not a little girl anymore. I'm 15, almost 16, and I've been dealing with autism and grief and social isolation for years. I think I know the difference between genuine care and manipulation." Dr. Chen intervened gently. "Charlotte, can you tell your father specifically what you've gained from your relationship with Patricia?" Charlotte's face lit up in a way that made Robert's chest tighten with recognition. It was the same expression Eleanor used to get when talking about her art. "I've gained someone who doesn't try to fix me," Charlotte said. "Someone who listens when I talk about my interests without making me feel like I'm talking too much or being too intense. Someone who understands that sometimes I need quiet spaces, and sometimes I need to stim, and sometimes I just need to cry about missing Mom without anyone trying to make it better." She looked directly at her father. "I've gained someone who sees my autism as part of who I am rather than something wrong with me. And Dad, I've gained someone who helps me remember what it felt like when you used to see me that way too." Robert's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "Before Mom died, you used to brag about how I could name all the constellations when I was 7. You used to show people my drawings and talk about how creative I was. You used to be proud of the things that made me different." Tears gathered in Robert's eyes. "I'm still proud of you." "No, you're not," Charlotte said sadly. "You're worried about me. You're guilty about me. You're afraid for me. But you're not proud of me. Not the way you were when Mom was alive to help you see me clearly." The kitchen fell silent except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Dr. Chen let the moment breathe before speaking. "Mr. Pemberton, how do you respond to what Charlotte just shared?" Robert looked at his daughter, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time since Eleanor's death. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the strength she developed in navigating a world that often misunderstood her, the compassion that had led her to open their home to strangers during a storm. "You're right," he said quietly. "Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing your differences as gifts and started seeing them as vulnerabilities I needed to protect you from. I thought I was keeping you safe, but I was actually keeping you small." He turned to Patricia, his expression softening slightly. "And I think I attacked you because you saw what I'd stopped seeing, that Charlotte is remarkable exactly as she is." Patricia felt her throat tighten. "Mr. Pemberton, I never meant to come between you and your daughter. I just recognized someone who needed the same kind of acceptance I used to give my son." "Tell me about your son," Robert said, surprising everyone. For the next hour, Patricia shared stories about Marcus. His brilliance, his struggles, his unique way of seeing the world, and the devastating loss that had left her adrift until she'd found Charlotte. She spoke about the cafe she'd once dreamed of opening, about her vision of creating spaces where neurodivergent people could thrive rather than just survive. Dr. Chen guided the conversation skillfully, helping Robert understand that Patricia's financial struggles didn't negate her capacity for genuine love, and helping Patricia see that Robert's protectiveness came from trauma rather than malice. "What I'm hearing," Dr. Chen said as the afternoon wore on, "is that you all want the same thing, for Charlotte to be happy, healthy, and able to flourish as her authentic self. The question is whether you can work together to create that environment." "I have a proposal," Charlotte said suddenly, her voice carrying a confidence that made both adults sit up straighter. She stood and walked to a folder she'd placed on the counter earlier, pulling out several sheets of paper covered in her neat handwriting. "I've spent the last 3 weeks thinking about what I want my life to look like, and I've come up with a plan. Dad, I know you're worried about my education and my future. Patricia, I know you need stability and purpose. And I know we all need to find a way to be a family that works for everyone." Charlotte spread the papers on the counter, revealing detailed research, budget projections, and timelines. Patricia's dream was to open a cafe that employed neurodivergent people. What if we made that dream happen, but bigger? What if we created a social enterprise, a combination cafe, bookstore, and community center specifically designed for people who need sensory-friendly spaces? Robert leaned forward, his business instincts engaged despite himself. "Go on. I've researched the market, and there's huge demand for this kind of space. Families with autistic children, adults with sensory processing issues, elderly people who need quiet environments. There's a whole population that's underserved by traditional businesses." Charlotte's excitement was infectious as she outlined her vision. Patricia would manage the day-to-day operations and handle hiring and training. You could provide the initial investment and business guidance. And I could help with social media, customer outreach, and creating programs for teenagers like me who don't fit into typical social spaces. Patricia stared at the papers, seeing financial projections, staffing plans, and marketing strategies that revealed the depth of Charlotte's intelligence and determination. "You've thought of everything," she said in wonder. "Not everything," Charlotte admitted. "But I've thought about the important things. Like how this could give you the purpose you've been missing since Marcus died. How it could give Dad a way to channel his protective instincts into something constructive. And how it could give me a chance to be part of creating something that makes the world better for people like us." Robert studied the papers, his expression unreadable. As a businessman, he could see the potential in Charlotte's proposal. As a father, he was stunned by his daughter's maturity and vision. "This is quite ambitious," he said finally. "Too ambitious?" Charlotte asked, her confidence wavering slightly. "No," Robert said, looking up at her with something that might have been pride. "Not too ambitious. Actually, it's brilliant. But it would be a huge commitment for all of us." "I'm ready for that commitment," Charlotte said. "Patricia!" Patricia looked between Charlotte and Robert, seeing possibility where she'd expected only conflict. "I'm ready too," she said. "But I need to know that this isn't just about giving me something to do. I need to know that you both genuinely want me to be part of this family." Robert was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he'd heard and seen over the past few hours. His daughter wasn't the fragile, vulnerable child he'd been trying to protect. She was a young woman with intelligence, vision, and the kind of strength that came from surviving loss and choosing hope anyway. "Patricia," he said finally, "I owe you an apology. I judged you based on circumstances rather than character, and I said things that were designed to hurt rather than protect. That was wrong." Patricia nodded, accepting the apology with grace. "But more than that," Robert continued, "I need to thank you. You gave my daughter something I'd forgotten how to give her, the feeling that she was valued exactly as she is. You helped her remember her own strength and vision. That's not something someone does for ulterior motives. That's something someone does out of love. He looked at Charlotte, then back at Patricia. If you're both serious about this business venture, then yes, I'd like to be part of it. And if you're both serious about being a family, an unconventional, complicated, chosen family, then I'd like to be part of that too. Charlotte felt tears of joy streaming down her face. Really? Really, Robert said, standing to embrace his daughter. But we do this properly. Legal agreements, clear expectations, regular family meetings to work through any issues that come up. And therapy, Dr. Chen added with a smile. Regular family therapy to help you all learn how to communicate and support each other effectively. Agreed, Patricia said, feeling lighter than she had in years. 6 months later, the morning rush was in full swing at different grounds, but it was unlike any rush in any other cafe in New Jersey. The lights were soft and warm rather than harsh fluorescent, the music was kept at a gentle volume, and the color scheme featured calming blues and greens rather than jarring reds and yellows. Charlotte stood behind the counter, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing a comfortable navy blue t-shirt with the cafe's logo, a tree with branches that formed a heart, symbolizing growth through connection. She was teaching Kevin, one of their first neurodivergent employees, how to operate the specialized coffee machine they'd installed to reduce noise and sensory overwhelm. Remember, the steam wand makes a loud noise for about 10 seconds, Charlotte said patiently. You can wear your noise-canceling headphones during that part if you need to. Kevin nodded gratefully. At 24, he'd been unemployed for 3 years after struggling in traditional restaurant environments that didn't accommodate his need for predictable routines and quiet spaces. Patricia moved through the cafe with the confidence of someone who had found her calling. She checked on the book club meeting in the quiet corner, a group of adults with autism who met weekly to discuss their favorite novels, then stopped to help Jenny Martinez, who had become their weekend event coordinator after leaving her job at the mall. The sensory-friendly story time starts in 10 minutes, Jenny said, adjusting the soft lighting in the children's area. We have 12 families signed up. Perfect, Patricia said. And the teenage social skills group? Charlotte's leading that at 2 o'clock. She's got 8 regulars now, plus 3 new kids whose parents heard about us through word of mouth. The cafe had exceeded all their expectations. Within 3 months of opening, they'd become a gathering place for families who had struggled to find accepting spaces elsewhere. Parents of autistic children drove from 3 states away to attend their weekend workshops. Adults with sensory processing issues had found a place where they could work, socialize, or simply exist without constant overstimulation. The bell above the door chimed softly. Patricia had insisted on a gentle sound rather than the harsh jangle most businesses used, and Robert entered, carrying his laptop and wearing the kind of satisfied expression that came from meaningful work. "How are the numbers looking?" Patricia asked, joining him at his usual table by the window. "Better than projected," Robert said, opening his laptop to show her the quarterly reports. "We're not just breaking even, we're actually turning a profit. The corporate consulting contracts are really taking off." Different Grounds had evolved beyond just a cafe and community center. They now offered consulting services to businesses wanting to create more inclusive environments for neurodivergent employees and customers. Robert's business expertise, combined with Patricia's understanding of sensory needs and Charlotte's lived experience, had created a unique and valuable service. "And the expansion?" Patricia asked. "I've got 3 potential locations, 2 in New York and 1 in Philadelphia. If we move forward, we could have the 2nd location open by Christmas." Patricia shook her head in amazement. "A year ago, I was cleaning out my apartment to move in with my sister. Now we're talking about expanding to other cities." "A year ago, I was a workaholic who barely knew his own daughter," Robert said. Now I spend my days creating inclusive workspaces and my evenings playing board games with the most remarkable family I could have imagined." Their conversation was interrupted by laughter from the counter, where Charlotte was demonstrating the coffee machine's quieter settings to a group of new customers. Her confidence had grown exponentially over the past 6 months. She was no longer the anxious teenager hiding in mall corners, but a young woman who had found her voice and her purpose. "She's incredible," Patricia said, watching Charlotte with the kind of maternal pride that had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with love. "She is," Robert agreed. "And she gets it from both her mothers." Patricia felt tears gather in her eyes. The word mother still felt new and precious when applied to her relationship with Charlotte, but it fit in a way that felt both surprising and inevitable. Charlotte finished with the customers and approached their table, her face flushed with excitement. "Guess what just happened?" she said, settling into the chair between Patricia and Robert. "Mrs. Henderson from the high school called. They want to hire us to do a full accessibility audit of their campus and train their teachers on neurodivergent-friendly teaching methods." "That's wonderful," Patricia said. "It gets better," Charlotte continued. "She said they've been watching how confident I've become over the past year, and they want me to be part of the presentation team. They think having a student perspective will make the training more effective." Robert felt his chest swell with pride. A year ago, Charlotte had barely been able to speak up in therapy sessions. Now she was being invited to train teachers at her own school. "Are you nervous about presenting?" he asked. "A little," Charlotte admitted, "but also excited. A year ago, I thought being different meant being less than everyone else. Now I know it means seeing things others miss, and that's actually valuable." She looked around the cafe, taking in the diverse group of customers: families with special needs children, college students studying in the quiet zones, elderly couples enjoying gentle conversation, business people taking advantage of the sensory-friendly workspace areas. "We built something beautiful," she said. "All of us together." Patricia reached for Charlotte's hand, and Robert covered both their hands with his own, a gesture that had become their family's signature way of connecting. "We did," Patricia said. "And we're just getting started." Through the cafe's windows, they could see spring arriving in Englewood. Trees were budding, flowers were beginning to bloom, and the world was waking up to new possibilities. Inside Different Grounds, 3 people who had been broken by loss had found wholeness through love, purpose through service, and family through choice. Charlotte's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and smiled. "Sophia Martinez," she said, showing them the message. "She's 7 now, and she wants to know if she can help with story time next weekend. She says she has very gentle hands for turning pages." "Tell her yes," Patricia said immediately. "Tell her we always have room for gentle hands here." As Charlotte typed her response, Patricia and Robert exchanged a look of perfect understanding. They had created more than a business. They had created a community, a place where people who felt different could belong exactly as they were. "You know what the best part is?" Charlotte said, looking up from her phone. "What's that, sweetheart?" Patricia asked. "A year ago, I thought I was broken because I couldn't fit into the world the way it was. Now I know that sometimes the world needs to change to fit people like us. And we're the ones helping it change." Robert felt tears gather in his eyes as he looked at his daughter. Confident, purposeful, surrounded by love and focused on making the world better for others who struggled the way she once had. "Your mother would be so proud," he said softly. "Both my mothers would be," Charlotte said, squeezing Patricia's hand. As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Different Grounds, illuminating a space built on acceptance and love, 3 people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances continued to build something beautiful together. A chosen family, a thriving business, and a community where being different was not just accepted but celebrated. The story that had begun with a lonely girl sitting by a fountain and a grieving woman choosing compassion over indifference had grown into something none of them could have imagined. A legacy of love that would touch countless lives and prove that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones we choose for ourselves. In a world where differences are often seen as deficits, sometimes the family we need most is the one we never saw coming. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.